Hi everyone, thanks for making it on your lunch hour. Before I dive into my story about my journey to designing in public services, I'd love to get to know you all a little bit better since we're a little bit of an intimate crowd. I'd love to go around and I see some familiar faces and I also see some new faces. So if you don't mind sharing your name and the last public service that you experienced and how that experience was for you. I'll go first. So as Liz said, my name is Shelly. The last service that I experienced was probably the subway to get here, and I'm actually really satisfied with how often the trains run and how much information is provided about them, for the most part. I can start with you.
Hi, I'm Carrie Sang, and I'm a second-year IXT student. I'm probably the same as you. Last public service I experienced was the MTA subway. And it worked well today, so I was happy.
Hi, I'm Max Kessler. I'm also a second year in the program. I guess most recently was probably the crosswalk sign as I was getting over here from getting lunch, which was working really well. So no problems with that, yeah.
And it doesn't have to be the most recent service. It might all be the same service. And if you have any, I forgot to mention this, if you have any specific questions or like things that you'd love for me to talk about designing in government, this is a great time to share that.
Hi, I'm Saba. I'm a first year here, so this is all very new. And I guess I'll just, one of the public services yesterday was the U.S. Postal Service, so getting mail. Yeah, it was okay. It wasn't all that great.
Thanks for bringing that one up, actually. My name is Gary Chow. I'm on the faculty here. I just got yelled at by my postal carrier, for not having a very easily accessible door to deliver mail.
Did they yell at you in person? Or send you an angry letter?
Well, it was kind of like yelled in the general direction of me, but not to be at me, so it wasn't so confrontational, but it was clearly that he was frustrated with the experience from his end of it.
Hi, I'm Debbie Koo, and I'm a second year, and my most recent would be helping someone who had to deal with the police.
Who had to deal with the police?
Who had to deal with the police.
Oh, wow.
They had been arrested for an incident and needed someone to help them like be a liaison. Yeah.
Hi again, I'm Liz, and the most recent service I have encountered is the Office of Learning Technology at SVA, who are filming this event, which was a great surprise to see it up and running and working so well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anke Stuhlmann. I'm an alumni from 2015. A not good public service thing was actually this morning, taking the 6th train, and it was way overcrowded and didn't come for like 5-10 minutes. So it was not a good commute this morning.
Hi, my name is Mohammed. I'm a physician and the father of a student here. The last public service, 2 days ago, given a pint of blood for the Red Cross. Oh, and the Lincoln Tunnel yesterday, which was absolutely great. One of the rare times it was just straight through.
Hi, I'm Sally. I'm the mother of David L. Abraham. And I just finished listening to Girl on a Train from my downloadable app from the public library.
Hi, I'm David L. Abraham. I'm a first-year student. Obviously, these are my parents. And I was waiting with my car during street cleaning today, alternate side parking transitions. And for the third time I've done that recently, they did not come. Which was interesting to realize that I'm now very aware of when they do and do not clean our street. So.
Hi, I'm Ritvik. I'm a first-year student, and the last public service I used was the MTA subway. It was late, but that just gave me something to complain about, so I guess that ended well.
Well, thank you, everyone. So this year, as Liz mentioned, I'm a Code for America Fellow, and I'm one of 23 other designer and engineers who are working with local governments. The way the fellowship is set up is we are put on a really small team, and we are paired with one city or county for an entire year, and we work on public services, the digital aspect of them, like many of the things you named, transit. We haven't worked on mail yet, but there have been a couple transit projects. In Detroit, there's a project that's still running called Where's My Bus, where you can text a number and it'll tell you where the bus is. So the mission of Code for America is to build a 21st century government for the people, by the people, and with the people. And Code for America is only one way of designing a government, but it is a path that I have really enjoyed. And so today, I'll tell you the story of how I got here, lessons I learned along the way, and also the other people that are part of this movement and how you can find your way here too. So my story starts in Pittsburgh in 2012, the summer before I came to grad school. This is a hot July day. It was maybe like 100+ degrees outside, and I was hanging out in a local cafe doing some freelance work when a bunch of people that I'd never seen before in that Starbucks walked in. They were older, they were holding signs, they were sweating a lot because it was so hot outside. And one of them sat down across from me and struck up a conversation. And he said something like, I usually don't come to Starbucks because I can't afford the coffee here, but it's so hot outside, I want to spend some time in the AC. And I asked him, like, well, what are you doing here? What's with these signs? And he said that he had been working in the steel mills most of his life, gotten injured, couldn't work anymore, was depending on his disability and pension to carry him through while he wasn't working and while he retired, but every month he didn't have enough money. He was barely scraping by. The amount of money that he thought he would get was very different from the amount of money that he actually got. So he told me at the end of the month he often had to choose between feeding his dog or feeding himself. And I was really surprised to hear this, and I said something like, well, what do you want Obama to do about it? Like, how do you want this to be changed? What do you need? And his response was totally shocking. He reached across the table and grabbed both of my hands and he said, thank you, no one has ever asked me that before. Thank you for asking me what I need. And he left to continue to go to the rally, and I was just struck sitting there thinking like, that the institutions that this man relied on for most of his life to take care of him had never asked him what he actually wanted, had never taken into account his needs, and didn't provide any clear way for him to communicate those needs to them. Like, he so badly wanted his story heard that he was willing to join this crowd of hundreds and hundreds of people on a hot summer's day, just so that anyone from the government could hear his story. And it made me think, how did institutions that make up the safety net get so far removed from the people that they serve? And how could I infiltrate those institutions? Because what I do for a living and what you do for a living is uncover people's needs and build services that respond to them. In Pittsburgh, I relied on another public service, the bus. And while I was thinking about all of these things, I was waiting for the bus one day, browsing Facebook, and came across a post by a friend about how there were upcoming cuts to Pittsburgh bus service. 30% of Pittsburgh bus service was on the chopping block in 2012. And not only did I rely on the bus, but many other Pittsburghers do, and I was surprised that I hadn't seen any word about these cuts that were supposed to happen in a couple of months at the bus station or on the bus. In fact, I just found it on a random Facebook post. I didn't know how to stop the cuts, but I did know that I wanted other people to know about it. So I wanted to give people a space to express why a particular bus route was important to them, and also notify them that this stop might be on the chopping block, or this route might be on the chopping block. So in the style of Candy Chang, one of my favorite designers, who puts together sort of Mad Lib kinds of print designs and puts them in public spaces, prompting people to fill them out. I hand-stamped hundreds of yellow Post-its like you see here, and I just asked people to say why they needed that bus in a couple short lines. And I cold emailed a local activist group called Pittsburghers for Public Transit because I figured that I had hundreds of Post-its and I was only one person. And to my great surprise, they emailed me back, and one midnight, we just drove around town putting up these Post-its on 6 different bus routes. I had no idea what would happen once the stickers were up. Like maybe they would get rained out, maybe they'd be taken down, maybe I'd get caught and fined for messing up city property. But instead, I saw people fill out stickers like this, and this is the level of response that I didn't even expect from a random bus rider. The friend who had posted initially about the cuts also had an online petition going, so I wanted the flyers to be more than just tell me your story in this space. They also had a link to this website, SOS-PGH, that I built in partnership with some students from Carnegie Mellon. And at the site, people could fill out digital stickers, and I also routed them towards my friend's petition. A week later, the response was overwhelming. People had run out of space and were starting to write all over the flyer. We did get an occasional penis doodle, but I feel like that's almost like a badge of honor for doing anything print in public. The overwhelming response made me feel like we had given folks a space to articulate why they needed the bus. And they had answered over and over again, and seeing all the different types of handwriting was really powerful. We had funneled maybe a couple dozen signatures towards my friend's petition. I had made a friend in the Pittsburgh activist community that I never thought I would get connected to, and the students I worked with left with a great portfolio piece. And months later, the cuts thankfully were not made as a result of bus drivers agreeing to take a cut to their pensions in order to keep the routes running. So kind of a happy ending for bus riders everywhere in Pittsburgh. Something that I was unsatisfied with was I had made a visible, tangible difference in this conversation, but I didn't actually know what happened after we delivered this petition. Like, who was actually making the decision about the bus cuts? What would influence them? I had gotten a taste for what it was like to engage people around conversations around public services, but didn't actually know how to really affect change. Some lessons that I learned from this sort of 2-week experiment are ask people what they need. Like, people are all too willing to tell you about public services and how they could be better for them, both the man at Starbucks and these random bus riders who I didn't know at all. Context matters. It mattered to me as a bus rider that information about the bus was not actually displayed on the bus stop. And lastly, and this probably carries through the entrepreneurial design projects that you have done or will do, is giving people permission to help you is super powerful, because often when you ask something of your networks, something comes back to you. So after this summer, I moved to New York, started at SVA, and I remember the very first presentation that we were shown on the first day of school. It was Michael Yap, who was working here at the time, and he asked us, like, what kind of designer do you want to be? And he showed us, a couple sample sentences, and then he crossed off the I want to part. He said, don't just want to be this, just be that. Even if you don't think you know what you're doing, start acting like you are one. A year later, it was time for me to start my thesis. And I started with the question, what can I do in my neighborhood? And I found this local cafe called Reconnect. And Reconnect is an amazing space that provides job training opportunities and entrepreneurial skill building for young men in my neighborhood in central Brooklyn who needed a second chance, or maybe even a first chance. And so I wasn't sure what would come about from spending a lot of time at Reconnect, but I did know they were an organization that I really admired, that I wanted to do some work that could help them. And I started with the method of simply spending a lot of time there, like getting to know the people who ran it, getting to know the people who are on staff, doing pro bono design projects, and making sure I had space to iterate through whatever it was I ended up building for them. 5 months later, I was just hanging out there one morning when one of the guys, Joseph, mentioned that he needed to run an errand at the local Social Security card office. He was applying for his next job training program, but that program needed him to bring in several forms of ID. So I thought, great, like Social Security card office, not too far, you're from Brooklyn, I'm an educated adult working on my master's degree, like we can totally figure this out. Unfortunately, 6 hours later, we were at the Social Security card office after going to the wrong one, being unsure of the hours for the current one, looking through the application to replace your Social Security card and coming across lines that said, you may bring these documents if you don't have these other ones. And I was surprised again, like what kind of application says, you may bring in this thing and we'll see what happens. So Joseph had lost several documents through moves when he was younger, but he did have his high school diploma, and that was listed as one of the documents that he could bring in. So after 6 hours of waiting, we go up to the ticket window and the guy behind the counter just takes one look at his high school diploma and says, oh, sorry, like, we don't really like accepting these here. We'd rather get a note from your doctor about who you are. And so we left without a Social Security card after being super confused, after waiting a long time. And additionally, like Joseph was just told that one of his biggest accomplishments, graduating from high school, didn't mean anything to the state. And even though I didn't set out looking for a project to work on public services, just by spending time at Reconnect, I realized how ubiquitous they are. They touch everyone. And bad experiences with public services disproportionately affect people with fewer resources. Like this was a huge barrier for him. So I decided that I would work on providing better information to people who were applying for basic IDs, especially people with lower literacy or fewer resources. I iterated through many different ways of providing this information, from a choose your own adventure book, which didn't actually go over very well, to printed pamphlets, to a mobile-friendly website. Here I am testing this at the New York City Department of Probation. They have an office in the Bronx that's actually really open to new ways of serving probation clients. And the story behind this is that I maybe cold called and walked into 20 or 30 different nonprofits, different government agencies, trying to figure out were the problems that I was seeing at Reconnect shared by other New Yorkers. And it was really hard to like cold call an agency, explain what I was doing, and trying to see if they too shared this problem. But a friend of mine told me, like, all you need is one yes. You just need one other partner that's willing to test this with some people to tell you that this is also a problem. So I ended up thesis with a suite of prototypes that I had tested in the real world, both with folks at Reconnect and also with probation clients in the South Bronx. And lessons that I drew from working on this for thesis are when seeking organizations to work with, sometimes all you need is one yes. You don't need 5 organizations to pilot something with, you just need one. And when working with an organization and a community that you are less familiar with, building trust with them and prototyping to get to the right thing takes time. So start early, don't expect that you'll hit on the right thing right away. It just takes months and months of relationship building and trying things out with them. Shortly after thesis, I met some folks at the Blue Ridge Foundation. They have a summer program for designers, engineers, product people who are interested in designing products and services for low-income New Yorkers. And this was a really serendipitous thing to roll into right after thesis. And I met my friend Jimmy, and he told me that he was really interested in working on making government applications easier for low-income New Yorkers to navigate. And I was like, great, Jimmy, I just spent the last 9 months thinking about this, and I have some prototypes already. We went to a variety of different social service offices in New York and settled on working on food stamps. And one thing we noticed right away when we were just spending time hanging out in food stamp offices, talking to people there who were applying for food stamps, otherwise known as SNAP, were that everyone was on their phones. Lines, like we sat there for maybe 4 or 5 hours before someone talked to us, and everyone was passing the time on their smartphone. And we knew that there was an online application for food stamps, but we're still kind of baffled by why so many people showed up in person. And saw that there was probably an opportunity to translate this online application that doesn't work on any mobile devices into one that worked on cell phones, maybe saving all of those people who had a smartphone from a 4 or 5 hour initial visit when applying for a really important program. So we iterated, we tested, and a couple weeks later we had Easy Food Stamps, which is a super mobile-friendly, user-friendly experience for applying to food stamps, touching on multiple parts of the application process, from the initial application form you send in, to an interview that you'll have to do over the phone, to uploading documents that prove your income and where you live and who you are, things like that. And this was a lot of fun. We had a lot of positive feedback from people that we tested with directly, and also a lot of people at Blue Ridge were excited about what we were doing. We were maybe a little too excited when, after we had tried what we were doing with just ourselves, that we decided that it was time to get real people through this thing that we were working on. We were also working towards the demo day for the Blue Ridge Accelerator and really wanted to get a lot of people through to prove that what we were working on was viable. So we ended up sending in 250 applications via fax to one fax line that we had tested and knew that worked. There were other fax lines, but when we faxed in our applications to them, nothing ever happened. So we sent in 250 applications at once and learned that public officials don't like surprises. So we had taken a meeting with someone who was working on technology and food stamp applications, and I wasn't actually at the meeting since I was traveling, but what she had told us was like she wasn't interested in our solution. The problem we were solving was not one that she was super interested in. Why don't we focus on another part of the food stamp application process? Stop what we were doing, because her team was already working on a huge multi-million-dollar, several-year IT improvement project on food stamps. And our response to that meeting was probably not the right thing to do, in which we thought to ourselves, like, no, like we saw the problem with the long waits. We have the solution that many people have told us is great. Let's go ahead and move forward with sending in all of these applications to test our own assumptions. It turns out when the city doesn't want you to do something, they can really stop you from doing that thing. So even though those 250 applications went in and got processed, we were slapped pretty heavily on the wrist with the threat of a cease and desist letter, and nonprofits that we had been talking to about partnering with were all of a sudden like, ooh, like we don't want to get in trouble with the government. Maybe you should go somewhere else. So we did, we had to. We couldn't operate in New York City. This was definitely a blow to what we thought we would do, but it was also a really great learning experience. And the next thing we did was we found a program sponsored by the city of Philadelphia for startups who are interested in working on public services. So we completely changed our approach. When we were in the city of Philadelphia, we sat down with many different city officials and tried to figure out like what their problems were and how what we were working on could help with their problems. We didn't come in with a solution, and we didn't go from 5 to 250 applications. We went from 5 to 10 to 15. So lessons learned: great products die without good relationships. When I was working on thesis, I had sort of built my own relationships, but I was really focused on what does it even mean to design a good public service? When I was working with Propel, I was really focused on what does it mean to really have a really great food stamp application experience? But I didn't think enough about what does it mean to sustain this thing that we've built? Who's going to allow it to happen, and who's going to champion it when we run into resistance? And I also learned about having empathy for the people and the processes on the other side of government. There's probably a reason why food stamp applications are so bad, why they don't work on phones. And understanding those reasons and working with those processes is really important if you want to fix them. And again, like, scale slowly if you're working in this kind of area. Food stamps are sensitive. Government officials can be sensitive about them. So something that I've definitely learned from this and also being at Code for America is solve it for one person first. Just choose one person, do it for them, learn from that, then see if you can solve it for 10 people. And don't even build a backend. Don't automate what you're doing. Do it by hand. There's a food stamp team in California at Code for America, and they like to build according to something they call the no stack approach. They just sort of connect together Google Docs and existing online services and haven't really written at the beginning of their project any lines of code, but they are already serving tens, 20 some odd people in California. So the last section is, after my experience at Propel, I was really wondering, like, as an outsider, as a business person, as a student, I can work on the external facing parts of government because those are the pieces that I see. But I was frustrated that even if we could make the best food stamp application experience ever, we didn't know what would happen once the application went onto the other side of the counter. What if it got lost? What if the data was entered poorly? What if the ways they judge applications is not the most fair? How do they manage all of that data? All of these were questions that could affect how someone's application could get processed. And those were things that I didn't have any insight into. So as a Code for America fellow, my question to myself this year was, how do I affect change actually inside the government? What's in that black box? So this year, me and my team have been paired with the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we've been asked to work on procurement. Procurement is the way that governments buy everything they need to implement the programs that they have. So the city of Pittsburgh buys thousands of tons of rock salt for the winter to melt all the ice on the roads. They buy bridges, they buy fire trucks, they buy internet service for City Hall, all of these things that run the city. And the first month we were in Pittsburgh, we took almost 100 meetings. We met with 60 city and county staff involved with every part of the process, and we met with 30-odd local businesses who are interested in selling things to the city, had many stories to share about how that could be better. And from my experience, I realized that what goes on inside City Hall is probably worse than you could ever imagine. This is an example of a spreadsheet that purchasing agents use to track the hundreds of contracts that the city of Pittsburgh has. And it's this long, and before we showed up, they printed it on like a huge sheet of paper. It was 20 pages long, and they had a weekly meeting dedicated to going through the spreadsheet and trying to make sure they hadn't missed anything. Everything is also the best. Like, despite these crazy tools and crazy processes, cities still run. This is a series of thank you cards that we wrote to all the people that we met with because we were impressed that they had managed to keep this giant ship running despite all of the limitations they ran up against. Through our time at the city, we got a really intimate look at all the different kinds of things that people bought. This is a bone drill that we saw in the basement of the emergency medical services supply room. A bone drill is used to drill in these special kind of needles into your bone marrow if you're severely injured, because it's the fastest way to get an IV into someone. They're like life-saving medical equipment. And they're always in short supply this year because the only vendor that sells them to the city wasn't notified that the contract was up and wasn't notified about the right window of time to send in a new proposal to continue being on a contract with the city to sell needles in bulk. So now they can't buy more than $2,000 worth of needles at a time. So they're constantly scrambling to make sure that this life-saving medical equipment is in their supply rooms. And this is a story that we heard over and over again while we were in the city, just like supply chain problems having to do with a lot of miscommunication. And when we wondered why a vendor could possibly miss this really important deadline, we saw the way that city opportunities were currently advertised. The city is obligated to put up an advertisement in the classified section of at least 2 local papers for every contract that goes out to bid. And if I'm a local business, I'd have to keep coming back to this classified section and searching for the thing that I sell to make sure that I didn't miss the boat. We we took a lot of selfies when we talked with city staff. It was an interesting way of breaking the ice and marking important meetings. This we took with people from Parks and Recreation who had a cleaning contract that they had bid out 3 or 4 different times to clean senior centers all across the city of Pittsburgh. And each time they bid it out, no businesses responded, only one business responded, and the end result was they didn't have anyone to clean the senior centers. And they were having employees, like park guides, working overtime to clean the bathrooms. So we saw this as an opportunity to test some of our assumptions. Something that we had wondered was simply, what if we just marketed the opportunities better online? Could that help spread the word, and could that result in more people bidding on city opportunities? So we asked them, hey, do you mind doing a really quick pilot with us? We'll make you a really simple online marketing campaign for your cleaning opportunity. And they took a chance on us and agreed. So we created a really simple 1-page website about deadlines about this opportunity, what the opportunity was, and set up a MailChimp list for them for interested cleaning businesses to sign up to learn more about the opportunity. MailChimp being like a free-ish service that facilitates newsletters for you. And the result of just being a little more proactive about putting information up online was 16 local businesses responded to this opportunity, which is 16 times more than they had previously. And not only were we able to confirm our assumption of making the information easy to access and being proactive about it online will result in more bids, it also spread word throughout the city about these Code for America fellows who had delivered results really quickly, and that number, 16, really helped our conversations for future things that we wanted to build. What we eventually did was make a website for all city opportunities to be advertised and make a mailing list for all businesses who are interested in all kinds of opportunities. But we didn't jump to this immediately. First, we did that smaller pilot, both to prove to ourselves that it was a good idea and prove to people in the city that they should help us do this. Since we launched this a month ago, over 300 businesses have signed up. And I was just in Pittsburgh giving a presentation to all city staff involved in purchasing about the new process to get opportunities onto this site. Before, there was no process. You just sent around a bunch of emails until you figured out the right person who could put the opportunity in the newspaper for you. Not only do the numbers make me feel good, the countable impact of what we're doing, but a lot of it is also showing up in the city, listening, and modeling new ways of working on things. And this is an email that we got right after one of our presentations about our project from one of the purchasing agents within the city. His job was to go through that super long spreadsheet I showed you at the very beginning. And one of the things we worked on was unlocking the data from that spreadsheet and making a much better way to capture it and manage it. And this is maybe the best email I've gotten all year, where when we had been working with him previously in the past, he had always been very nervous about the changes that we were implementing, unsure about us, and kind of hesitant to try the things that we had prototyped with him. But once he saw the presentation, once he thought about all the work that we had been doing with him, it really made me feel good that he saw that he was part of a much bigger thing, and that bigger thing was doing good in the city. So, lessons from being at Code for America. Build support by delivering something small quickly to people who will be making decisions about your work. Fix the basics first. A lot of designing for government isn't making the newest kind of thing. It's not thinking about what's the future of X. It's really just a lot of the government runs on super long spreadsheets. A lot of the government isn't sure about how to make an advertising website or build a mailing list. Fix those first. There's a lot of work to be done there. One thing that was also really important was getting decision makers aligned around outcomes, not specific things we would do for them. So part of all the meetings we took at the very beginning of our fellowship was to figure out like problems that we saw across the city and to communicate that back to the main decision makers and say like, hey, one of the problems we're seeing is no one's bidding on city work. Do you see that as a problem? And they would say, yeah, definitely. And getting them to agree like that one of the things we would work on this year is increasing the number of people bidding on city work. We didn't talk about if that would be a website or a Twitter thing or what. It was just that to get them really excited about that goal so that we could prototype through different means of reaching that goal. And the last thing is how overlooked internal staff are. So much of the procurement issues in Pittsburgh that we saw were the result of no one really thinking about how the process would affect the people that actually had to manage the contracts. And I think that there's a huge opportunity to work on tools for internal staff to improve public services. If you've ever been at the DMV and had a negative experience, just peek around at the monitors that the people behind the counters are using to process your information. And the software they use is probably terrible. And if you show up to work every day and have to use terrible software for 8 or 9 hours a day to do your job, you feel like no one really cares about you or your job. And I think there is a lot to be done to increase the amount of empathy that we have for those people by building things that work better for them. I'll end on this note. A man who was very instrumental in the civic technology movement is Jake Brewer, and he passed away recently. And one of the things that they found on his desk was this Post-it that said, "Cultivate the Cuirass." And this comes from a Kurt Vonnegut novel about a fake religion where a cuirass is a name for a group of people who might not even know that they're linked, but are all connected in accomplishing a greater mission. And he had this on his computer, we think, to remind himself about how big the movement really is and how much effort it takes to nurture it, and how we should always be thinking about who's around us, who could be part of this, how do we bring them in. So my last set of things is just to pitch to you. You can join the cuirass, you can be part of the cuirass, you can cultivate the cuirass, and here are some options for you. I'm going to fly through them pretty quickly, but I'm going to send out the slides so you can access them in the future. So here are some options if I've piqued your interest and you want to just keep checking out the civic tech world. In New York, there's a co-working space called Civic Hall that's fantastic. Beta NYC is the volunteer arm of Code for America. There are groups in cities everywhere called brigades, and the New York Brigade is really big, and they're always working on cool projects. So go check out a meeting. I think they're on Wednesday evenings. There's definitely a meetup group. Data Chisnell is a design researcher that I really admire, and she's working on immigration right now in the federal government. And she has a great talk about how everyone in the government is a designer because designers are problem solvers, and the government needs a lot more of those. If you feel like building something, you've probably heard of Nikki's project, To Park or Not to Park, and that's something that she hacked together by herself. She's still working on, and it's awesome. Beta NYC has tons of code or not code things you could work on. Code for America has something called the Civic Tech Issue Finder, and it's just open issues for open source projects that you can participate in. And lastly, you could just take a public service experience you don't really like and redesign it. Take a form that you think sucks and make it better. If you're looking for an internship or a short-term thing, these three awesome organizations all work on public services to some extent, and they're all based in New York City, and they all take fellows at different points in the year. I know in particular Blue Ridge Labs takes fellows over the summer. If you're looking for a full-time job, you could be a fellow in 2017. Applications open up over the summer. If you want to work for New York City, their innovation team has some spots. If you want to work for the federal government, 18F, where Jeremy Canfield, who taught service design here last year, he's there. Meghna, an alum, is also there. It's basically a design consultancy embedded in the federal government, working with agencies. The US Digital Service is kind of like 18F, but you work in-house in a federal agency. Right now they're working on improving the immigration process and making veterans' benefits actually more accessible. And lastly, there's this new thing called a Congressional Innovation Fellowship, which is a year-long thing where you can work to improve the technology that Congress uses. If you're not sure about entering into the belly of the beast, there are many companies that work on public service related projects, and here are a couple of them. And that's all. Thank you so much for your time.